I'm very excited to welcome to the stage Niki DaSilva from the U.S. Chamber Foundation, Heather Ficht from East Cascades Works, Oregon Workforce Partnership. And then we have on the stage with us Lynn Nelson from Jireh Semiconductor. And then last but not least, Lindsay Woolsey from the Institute for Networked Communities. All right, so we're going to be talking about employer engagement, how we can engage employers. And I'm going to give each panelist 3 minutes to introduce yourselves. But before I do that, I just want to say that as the Vice Chair of the Workforce Talent Development Board, you know, I've been very excited and inspired by all the work and all of the folks who've worked so hard to get us here today. Back in 2019, I guess maybe, the Workforce and Talent Development Board put together our 2020-2022 strategic plan vision. And what rose to the top was equitable prosperity for all Oregonians. And that was actually a very elegant strategic plan. It's like a page, front and back. But I think Todd would say this is one of our most acted upon, implemented strategic plans, I think, ever. So get yourself a one-page strategic plan if you want to do something. And also, you know, out of that came our True Wage Task Force, which looked at the real stressors that Oregonians had around their wage, the Adult Learning Advisory Task Force, the AI Task Force, Equitable Prosperity. All of those things, I would say, led us to and helped move the ball to today. And so what we want to do today is help you better understand what we already do well regarding employer partnerships in key business sectors across the state. And we hope to get some innovative ideas, strategy that you can use to improve or transform the way we collectively develop talent in Oregon. So I'm going to go ahead and have folks introduce themselves. I'll start with Lindsay, and we'll just go on down the line.
Great, thank you, Shari. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Woolsey. I'm co-principal of the Institute for Networked Communities. We are a very small, very streamlined national nonprofit that houses the model, tools, and the community of practice for next-gen sector partnerships, which some of you are familiar with, and even a part of our community of practice. Inc., albeit small, has much tenacity, and it's because we have been doing this work for a long time now, and we know how hard the work is of actually building authentic collaboratives, coalitions, consortia, sector partnerships of employers. Inc. Was really just launched a couple years ago, but Next Gen Sector Partnerships has been up and running for almost 12 years now. We are in 20 different states and in almost every industry. I will say that all of what I've heard this morning, I am completely energized by, also nervous because lots of what has been discussed this morning, I think, is stuff we've been discussing for a really long time, right? And so I think over and over what I've heard, and I've heard from you, Shari, and everyone else, there is a huge opportunity for Oregon to get it, right? To get it right this time. And it's really on you. I think eyes might be on you from all over the country, and I hope they are, because you are putting together, I think, pieces that you know work. Best practices that we've known work for a long time, but how do you package that up? So I'll just say one more thing about Next Gen Sector Partnerships. The reason we came together and developed this model, we married decades of what we knew worked from traditional sector training and workforce partnership efforts from across the country, 30 years of experience. We married that with what we know works in building economic cluster partnerships, because what we know is that employers need to engage together. They need to step in and step up more, and the only way they can do that is if they really see how is this going to stabilize my company, stabilize my workforce, and allow me to thrive. And how is that going to happen in my place, in my community? And I think this is the biggest opportunity for Oregon and the country right now, is that this needs to happen in a way that is directly connected to communities. So place-based matters, I think, more than ever, especially as we go through the incredibly important racial reckoning that we are going through and understanding that our communities and people in those communities have been left out. So my work for the rest of my life, I think, will continue to be, how do we mobilize the private sector into real, authentic partnerships to tackle workforce and other competitiveness issues, and do that on behalf of the communities where those employers provide jobs. So that's Inc. and NextGen.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Heather.
Well, pardon me, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Heather Ficht, and I'm the Executive Director of East Cascades Works, and I am also a member of the Oregon Workforce Partnership, which is all 9 local workforce boards in Oregon partnering together. So the organization that I run serves the 10 counties east of the Cascades, and I'd be happy to rattle them off, but I don't think anyone cares. So it's basically the Highway 97 corridor. So we are a third of the state. And what's exciting about my workforce area is that it combines frontier, rural, and urban settings. So it is dynamic, fun, and huge. It's 30,000 square miles. So I joke that everything we do, we have to do times 3 because labor sheds matter. And I believe that workforce development is a team sport. And I heard that very clearly throughout the morning, and I basically just concur. No one of us are going to solve this by ourselves. It will take concerted effort. I really was inspired and appreciative of Patsy's comments earlier, really to that end. And so our role is really to connect talent with opportunity, and we do that on a scale. So we don't just connect an individual with a company or a job. We scale systems. And the reason that I do this work is because I get up every day to interrupt generational poverty. And I do that by working with industry and business, but I also do that by ensuring that our programs are serving people. That's what workforce is. It's people. So my brilliant colleague Bridget would say that. That's all workforce is. It's people. So I want to talk a little bit about, we're going to be doing a deeper dive into sectors and working with industry, but one of the things that's really important is how are we also reaching possibly folks that were not traditionally tapped for work. I heard John Tapania earlier talk about incarceration. Well, I'm very proud to boast that we in the East Cascades region, in partnership with WorkSource and Oregon Employment Department, actually have cited the first 2 WorkSource centers in Oregon prisons. So at Deer Ridge and at Warner Creek. And it's no joke. One of the most impactful factors in reducing recidivism is rapid attachment to employment. So we are catching people before they leave incarceration. Think about being incarcerated for 10 years. You don't even know what an iPhone is, right? Like, this is a big deal. How are you going to do a job search online? How are you going to talk about your transferable skills? So we are partnering with OED to really ramp that up, and we have actually worked with employers, for example, in the Madras area, where we've brought them into the prison, interviewed people, and they had job offers pre-release. So another priority population that we're working with beyond people who've been impacted by the criminal justice system are English language learners. This is another population that is underemployed and undervalued. I'd love to see more immigrant credentialing programs in our state where folks that are professionals in their home countries can come here and they can actually go back to work in their field and not just drive Uber. No offense to Uber, but there's other opportunity. And then I want to talk just really quick about the Construction Collaborative. So I represent one of the 4, we used to be new boards, but about 6 years ago, the state was redistricted and there were 4 new workforce areas formed. And 6 years ago, well actually 8 years ago, I learned from Lindsay here about how to do sector partnerships. And about 6 years now in Central Oregon, we've been convening a construction sector partnership. And I just want to do a shout out to Shannon McGivney, who is here today, who did the most innovative thing. She created a magazine about all of the incredible stuff that's happening in Central Oregon and in the Klamath Basin around the construction industry. I encourage you to go to eastcascadeworks.org and check out the Workforce in Action tab, and there's a magazine in there that really highlights a lot of the sector partnership things that we're doing in the construction industry. And I'm going to pass it on.
Hello, everyone. I'm Niki DaSilva from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. I live in Indiana, though, so don't think of me as some bigwig coming in from Washington, D.C., Midwest at heart. But I work primarily on talent pipeline management, and I'm really excited to be here. I'll echo what has been said already, just kind of the energy in the room and understanding what your plans are for the state. There's a lot of momentum here, and I think that's really incredible. You're in a kind of pivotal point of being able to really make some great changes for your community. My job at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation is primarily to work on talent pipeline management. So talent pipeline management is an employer-led approach to addressing the skills gap in communities and really thinking about how employers can take a leadership role in addressing a lot of the workforce challenges that we see. If you think about it, we as employers don't always do a good job of communicating what our needs are to our education and training providers or to potential workers and learners about what the expectations are going to be for them when they enter into a particular position. So what we try to do is help build that capacity within employers to really understand what their critical pain points are, what jobs do they need, how many, when do they need them, where, what are they currently signaling into the community about those particular jobs, and is there a better way to build a common language between their education and training providers so that they're able to respond better to industry needs, and where you're getting your best talent from. So what was just mentioned about really understanding, are there untapped sources of talent? Are we leaving talent on the table? If you don't know where your people are coming from, you're not going to know whether or not you're leaving people on the table. So employers need to be able to do that in an organized way where they understand the power of the data that they have, particularly in a collective form, to take action on that and really be better partners in building a talent supply chain. So that's basically what we do. That's what I eat, sleep, breathe every day. Is helping employers be better partners in their communities and really developing a systematic way to do that, which what we've seen, and I'll hopefully get a chance to talk about that a little bit more. There are 2 case studies in your packets as well as kind of an overview of the framework in your packet, but is helping build those sustainable talent supply chains with employers kind of leading the efforts in what is an employer problem, right? Employers hold that information and can be better partners in this way, but also just building better communities and thinking about how we can play a better role in that and keep employers engaged in that work. Another component of this that I just wanted to mention, because I saw a lot of conversations earlier today and then just information that was in our folders around the financing components of this, and really thinking about what those private-public partnerships look like and how we're signaling what government and education is willing to pay for and produce relative to industry demand. So understanding how the money flows and what that's actually incentivizing and thinking about what we actually should be incentivizing and if those are actually aligned. So having those conversations are also just as important as understanding your need. Money talks at the end of the day. So where's the money going, and does that actually meet what our needs are?
Thank you. Lynn?
Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for putting this together today. One of the things that we hear echoing up here is the employer side of things and letting us as employers get out to you guys what we need within the workforce. And I'm lucky. I started with Jireh Semiconductor back in 2017. Prior to really what we see as the semiconductor boom of the last couple of years. And I got the opportunity to sit down with my CEO, and he challenged me specifically to get into the community. I want Jireh known as a place that is out there that will employ people, whether it's entry level, whether it's college educated. We have positions for everybody. And we've seen over the time that I've started, having 20 openings all the way up to 170 openings and currently 99 openings, the need for that partnership. And we were lucky to be partnered with the city of Hillsborough in creating first off was a venture of all the manufacturing folks within the area, as we're all seeing a skills gap that we need. And we have not done a great job as employers over the years, because when there's an economic downturn, the first thing that we start to do is kind of shut off that hiring. And then we stop the partnership with these folks up here because we're too afraid about the money. The problem is that catches up with us eventually, and that's where we're at currently today. I've got a population that has over 25% of my equipment technicians that will hit the age of 65 within the next 10 years. And that is a huge disparity. My average employee worker has dropped a little bit over the last couple of years, but we see that our average employee in manufacturing specifically has a much higher level of age in industry. And these partnerships that we're creating are a fabulous opportunity to get folks engaged in opportunities such as manufacturing. When I'm able to talk to people and I can say you can make $45,000 as an entry-level person straight out of high school with a high school education, that's impactful, especially when we look at these disparities within economic and socioeconomic backgrounds of people that are traditionally left out of those markets and those job opportunities. It's important for us as employers to really tap in and define what we need in an individual worker. And one of the great things that we have the opportunity right now to do is we're working with the city of Hillsborough and the Hillsborough School District to get the first apprenticeship program for high school students into manufacturing. So we're meeting with BOLI and other industry partners to try to get this through to really get into high schools, because honestly, we need to start looking as employers at kids in grade school. If we don't get them engaged at an early age into manufacturing as a potential work opportunity, then we're losing out. We're losing out to everybody else that is engaged at the time. So it is important from an employer standpoint that we continue to work with these folks to tell you what we need. There's a definite disparity in the number of job openings in semiconductor specifically. We're basically just stealing from each other right now, and that does nobody any good. We need to build up people to get them the skills that they have the gaps in, so we can get them into good paying jobs which are available out there.
Thank you, Lynn. Just listening to all of you, I'm reminded of the quote by Dr. Martin Luther King that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And what I hear is each of you pulling it as you can toward justice in the areas that you work in, which is really lovely. Lynn, I would like to just take up a little bit on what you said about what you've learned as an employer. What has the learning about what you need or what is missing, how has it changed the way Jireh is doing things?
Great question. We look at that, and what I've learned and what we've learned is that for too many years, we were separated from the fact of what we needed in manufacturing. We took for granted that we had such a great workforce that was always going to be there. And we look at industry as a whole and the number of job openings, and what we realize now is we don't have that abundance of employees. So we have to come up as employers with ways to produce or create opportunities for individuals to get the skills that they need to be able to take these positions. So one of the things that we've learned is, in many ways, as great as partnerships are, we need to be responsible enough as a company to say, hey, if we're not, participating in these groups to get these employers or employees, we need to also create opportunities. So one of those things is PCC, Portland Community College. We're working with them specifically through their microelectronics mechatronics program to, identify areas where we need more individuals. They graduate roughly about 18 to 22 folks per year. But I can tell you right now, if we had the opportunity within industry to hire 1,000 of those people, we still wouldn't have enough. So what it is identifying areas that we need to get in front of these students early on to show them that they've got opportunities. So one of the things is really getting out and being, it's not an instant gratification thing. I'm going to have to work for years to get this built up, and that's an understanding. This Future Ready Oregon is not going to happen overnight. It is a opportunity for us to start at a very, very early age and build these folks into the talent and the source of employees that we need in the future.
All right, thank you so much. Now we're going to go national. Lindsay, what kind of things are necessary in this work to realize a genuine breakthrough in employer engagement from your national lens, what you see nationally?
So nationally, having done this work for a number of years and in so many states, I have come to what might sound like a simple and elegant one strategy here, and for employer engagement. So forget offering them lunch. Like, can we just move on from that, right? Forget needing something to give them first, by the way, which is a massive myth that is still all over the country and in every region. You have to have something to give an employer first. You heard it, I think, already, right? That is not true. Invite them in. But here's the number one, in my experience, employer engagement strategy. Get organized. Because what's preventing the critical mass of employers from engaging with you in an authentic and deep and sustained way is the death by 1,000 cuts that we are all guilty of. And so even in a frontier region, you're going to find, you've seen me do this if you've ever been in a room with me, you're going to find workforce boards, community colleges, training programs, economic development, fragmented chambers, all doing their own thing. And they are all knocking on the doors of employers like Jireh. And by the way, leaving another whole mass of employers just out there, totally unaware of what's going on. So the job of employer engagement is getting organized. It's getting organized across workforce boards, community colleges, get rid of the turf in the territory, which is really hard, but it's real. It's reaching out to chambers, other economic development entities, of which there are regional, city, statewide, and figuring out how do we actually get coordinated and organized to wrap arms with a critical mass of employers in a shared labor market region in a similar industry, and invite them in to create the solutions together. But if we're doing this and we keep doing this, and by the way, big risk is always a lot of money, because money comes down and it goes right back into this, but really intensely, right? So you do have a risk here, Oregon, of death by 1,000 cuts times 1,000, whatever that adds up to.
200 million.
Oh, thank you. 200 million. So if I had to bring it down to an elegant solution, it is get organized now. The reality under the hood of that, as Heather knows from building sector partnerships, as SOWIB knows, as Lane County knows, doing these sector partnerships in a really authentic way, when you lift the hood, it's messy. It takes a lot of work. It takes somebody who is trusted, who has credibility, can broker relationships across competing public systems and organizations, and mobilize your employers into a critical mass. That takes work. And I encourage, with Future Ready Oregon, especially for some of the still to be defined monies, how can you use that money to deliberately build the infrastructure you need at the regional level, and how is that going to have feedback loops and connections at the statewide consortia level? This is the work that I think Oregon has an opportunity to figure out.
All right, thank you. Well, Heather, the same kind of question, but from a regional lens.
Thank you. Well, I would agree with everything that Lindsay said, and it really takes a coalition of the willing. So you can wait and wait and wait. I only have 5 employers that are going to come to so meet. That could be your coalition of the willing that it starts with. You have to center the conversation around the employer voice. So they don't get to sit at the table and not talk. And as much as I love all of our education partners, that's not their time to talk either. It's not the time to talk about what exists or you should just use blah, blah, blah. That's not the conversation. The conversation is to, I was just talking to someone about this today. It's, I think it was Jonathan. It's diagnose before you prescribe, right? So if you come in with the solution, you're not listening. You're not listening. And I think that it's not just about listening, it's about businesses have to have some skin in the game. So this was some really early learning for me. I listened to everything Lindsay told me, and then I really wanted a quick win. So I pushed real hard on a solution because I had to come out of these meetings with something, right? And it was the wrong solution, and it went. So I realized my job isn't to set the table for the conversation and have all the support partners there and have the business there, and then I need to run back and take all that information and I have to come back and hand them something. That's not how it works. And that was a hard learning. I had to land on my face maybe more than once, but I've learned it now, and I'd like to give you an example of what it can look like when you actually listen and expect your business partners to be part of the solution. So in Central Oregon, we have a healthcare sector partnership. And one of the things that they were really, really concerned about writ large was the behavioral health pipeline. So both addictions treatment and mental health. And so they formed a subcommittee of those who were interested. There's about 18 different providers on that. And we had an incredibly strong business lead. It was our champion in next gen terms. It was our business champion. And her name was she's not dead, Dr. Kim Swanson with Mosaic at the time. And she led her peers into the development of a behavioral health consortia, and we decided this, they decided really, and we literally set the table and convened the meetings. I never dreamed that a sector partnership would be possible that from a local workforce board perspective, because generally speaking, we oversee the public workforce system, so we're really talking about those lower skilled jobs, those shorter term credentials. We are working with PhDs. We are increasing licensed clinical social workers because of this partnership. So what they decided to do together is no one of them had the capacity to recruit clinical folks. And so how do we do that? And how do we get recent grads to come our way in Central Oregon? Well, we band together. So we created this consortia where training and education is the focus. We are now, we've received a $1 million how-to grant from OHA to launch this. We just got notification of another $550,000 that is going to go into hiring 2 more licensed clinical social workers who will be able to provide supervision for up to 60 new clinicians in Central Oregon. The return on that investment is immediate. So we can actually have them working with, and because they are also offering to rotate the graduate students, then you can really figure out what's your pathway. And once you do your clinical placement here in Central Oregon, you're gonna wanna stay because you're gonna get offered a job next. And so we're just really excited about being quiet, listening, and then responding in a coordinated way together. And that doesn't mean it's nirvana, that means you're constantly reinventing every day, right? Okay, are we still relevant? Are we still meeting the needs of the industry? Are we still doing what we need to do to be effective? So go slow to go fast. Don't take forever to move forward, but don't do what I did and say, I need a win, I need a win. We had 3 meetings, what's the win? The employers will tell you with their feet what the win is, right?
All right, thank you so much, Heather. Nikki, this question is for you. What have you learned about the role of employers in other states and communities across the country? What can you tell us about that Talent Pipeline Management Initiative?
First of all, I just want to say I'm listening to you both speak. I'm like, should I be up here? Because we're all doing the same work, which I think is incredible with that employer focus. So just to what has already been said, you know, the employer plays a really important role in a talent supply chain in a more unique way than maybe we've thought about in the past. I know there are some employers in the room, so if you're an employer, would you mind raising your hand? I'm going to ask an additional question. Okay. How many of you, keep your hands raised, sorry. How many of you have been on an advisory board or asked to play an advisory role at some point? All right, almost everyone in the room, right? To the point that was made earlier by Lindsay, we're asking employers to play this advisory role a lot. And that's typically the only touch point that we have with employers, right? It's you have the one employer in the room or maybe a couple employers in the room, and now they're speaking for every industry in the region or maybe every industry in the state. And that doesn't really work. That's not sustained employer engagement. You have to tap into that employer return on investment and shared value. And that could be a monetary thing, but it could also be increased retention, higher productivity, increased employee morale. All of those things really matter to employees, to employers and their employees, and in turn to the communities. So by unlocking that employer leadership and really giving employers both the safe space and the tools to understand the data that they have at their disposal and to be able to communicate that in a collective way. You know, you talked about a lot of employers, most businesses are small to medium-sized businesses. We talked about some of the bigger businesses that you have here in Oregon, but that's the exception, not the rule. And so a lot of businesses don't have those internal resources to do this kind of capacity building work and focus specifically on talent, whether that's on recruitment, retention, advancement. And so bringing employers together and allowing them to really understand what their shared pain points are, what are those things that are keeping you up at night, that without this you cannot move forward, and being able to coalesce around that with the ready and the willing, right? We're not dragging any horses to water. You want to work with who is ready and willing to work with you, and really be able to then understand, okay, what your needs are, and how you're communicating that. And so what we have found, and I'll share just maybe a couple examples, is that can be really powerful. One of the examples you have in your packet that I just want to highlight on is in Phoenix. In the Phoenix region, the hospitals in that area recognized that they had some problems. I mean, healthcare has been a tough industry the past few years, right? And this work actually started right before the pandemic, so it was timely for them. But they thought that their biggest pain point was medical techs. They had thousands of open positions for medical tech assistants, and that's where they thought their pain points were. When they came together and really looked at the data, what was keeping them or holding them back, it was actually skilled specialty nurses in 6 critical areas. They were spending, I think it was close to almost $100,000 per travel nurse that they were bringing in for those skilled positions. And that was a huge cost to these hospitals. I think a lot of healthcare systems across the US are still struggling with that shortage in the nursing areas. So why were they having to bring in all of these nurses? There were no training programs in Phoenix for skilled specialty nurses, right? You could get your RN, but you'd have to leave Arizona to go and get trained in this for the upskilling component. So they were able to work with their community college district in Maricopa County with the employers in that region and actually lobby the state for funding to build clinical facilities to train their current workforce in those specialty areas. So I think at this point they've graduated a little over 200 nurses from that program. But think about that. Now they're not bringing in people temporarily, but they're able to grow their own talent and keep people in the region. So that's just kind of one example of employer leadership. Another one I wanted to touch on, because you'd mentioned some of the second chance programs that you all are doing with the prison population. And in Kentucky, they have, with their Blackburn, they call it their Blackburn reentry program. No shocker here, equine is a huge industry in Kentucky, right? They also do have a distillery collaborative. I had somebody mention that earlier. When I think of Kentucky, I think of bourbon. Yes, they do too. But in this particular instance, they were looking at the equine industry and recognizing that for a long time it's been very much kind of word of mouth or who you know, and that's how people have gotten into it. That doesn't really work for a lot of industries anymore. We got to think about it a little bit differently and think about maybe where is some of that untapped talent that we're leaving on the table. And so the Equine Collaborative worked together with the Blackburn prison facility, and they actually created a program where many of these men are actually getting training in how to be thoroughbred horse farmers, or to help with training, or any of the different positions within a horse farm. And so they're getting the training, and then the employers are coming in and doing mock interviews with them. So before they're even getting to the interview, these employers are investing in them while they're in their training program, helping them build those employability skills. So when they're leaving, they're getting jobs. What they realized when they first started that is it doesn't just stop at, okay, now this person's employed. To your point earlier, if you've been in jail for 10 years, you might not know a lot of what's changed in the world. So they've also built in additional wraparound services. So you kind of have that opportunity where employers have now taken a leadership role and recognize the power that they have when they come together and really understand what their challenges are and how they can meet their talent where they're at. So I think that's some of the true power of employer leadership, is giving them the tools that they need to be better partners, whether that's better partners to education and training providers or better partners to workers and learners.
Thank you. And yes, we do think bourbon. So, Lynn, I guess my question for you is, as an employer, what is one or two things you wish those seeking to engage would do?
I think a lot of it has to do with the ability to understand, everybody's got kind of that mentality of what's in it for me. And honestly, I'm one of those people that I try to build relationships with all sorts of folks, because manufacturing specifically is a very small knit group. So when you can get in with one of us, if you guys have the opportunity to engage with just one, that one can grow to be many more. So one of the things that we did with the Hillsborough work group was basically, it was folks, I know for sure one of the groups, or one of the members of our local group in manufacturing only employs about 12 people. And then you've got all the way up to, hundreds. So it's interesting as you build those relationships that, one person turns into many more. So as they talked about, you might only have one employer that engages at first. But over time, that's going to grow. So don't give up. Those cold calls or what have you are definitely going to come into effect at some point. So the ability to engage with an employer, or find that one employer that's willing to go in there and say, okay, I'm going to at least take the time to listen to what these folks have to give to us. The second part is, as industry. We all are busy. But just taking a couple minutes to engage with, I will tell you, the local chamber was great, because they also had manufacturing day. And all of a sudden I told them, hey, I missed the deadline on this. I just started at Jireh. And I'm like, hey, definitely want to participate next year. And then all of a sudden an employer dropped out, and they called me in, hey, Lynn, we just had somebody drop out. We're supposed to have 30 kids show up at an employer 2 days from now. Is there anything you can do? And I'm like, bring them in. I got them lunch. Domino's pizza, kids love Domino's, had lunch for them, and 2 days later, I'm taking these kids into a clean room environment, and happy faces, and that's how my relationship actually started, was, hey, I want to do this, and then all of a sudden there was an opening where somebody dropped the ball, wasn't prepared for these 35 students to show up, and I said, I'll take it. And as an employer, those little things that we can do as employers to engage with these folks are going to give us tenfold what we put out. So the understanding that building these relationships are the most important aspect going forward is the fact that we need industry business partners to be partners with the folks that are running these programs. It's a true partnership, and that's what we're lacking many times, is it's what's in it for me. Forget about what's in it for you, what's in it for the community that you're trying to work with. That's what's more important, because as business, we don't have customers if we don't have community.
Yeah, of course.
One thing on, so just to the point about keeping employers engaged or getting employers engaged and not leading people in that maybe don't want to participate in this. One thing that we've seen is as the employers who are ready and willing to come to the table are starting to collect their data and really understand, what their needs are, what ends up happening is other employers see that and they're like, well, wait a minute, how did you figure that out? Well, where did you get that information? And that sometimes can be an eye-opener to them about, well, we want to be doing that, or maybe that's not exactly reflective of us. These are our numbers, and that helps kind of build in another way to get employers to the table is when they see other employers are doing this and it's working for them, or they're getting insights on things that they didn't have before. That can be another way to lead people in. So you have your employer champions, you have the, hey, what are you doing? I want to be a part of that. That looks interesting, or you're getting something that I don't have. Is another tactic, I
Classic
suppose.
FOMO, fear
Yes.
of missing out.
It is FOMO.
I would say too that I think we've heard coalition of the willing, and I would also say, in my experience, it's start with your coalition of the willing, and cast a wide net, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat. Coalition of the willing, cast a wide net. Coalition of the willing, cast a wide net, because it really is, as you described, Nikki, it really is. Employers are just people, too, and so they're going to see likeness, and they're going to see you have that problem too, and they're going to see, oh well, if you could do that, I can do that. Maybe I can double it. Get some healthy competition in there. I think Bill this morning even used the term get them in a room and let them battle it out. But what that really means is let them have the space to step in and step up. And we need that desperately. We need co-investment in our workforce system and in our communities and our regional economies.
Real quick with that too, it's funny because, I talk about Big Brother. Big Brother is across the street from us. Big Brother is that big old company called Intel. Oh. And, it's one of those things where, that thing where there's success, we're working on this apprenticeship program right now. And, there's so many hurdles to go through, and, everybody's got a different idea of what they want. And what you have is this behemoth over here that wants one thing, and you've got the rest of us that want something else. And it's not always about the company that employs 22,000 people over there. It's about the fact that everybody that supports those 22,000 employees is probably another 100,000 employees within the state. So it's not just going after that big, the Intels of the world. I hate to bring them up. I mean, from a standpoint of, they're big. But what we have to realize is every single employer that is out there has a need. And when we focus on the need of everybody versus the need of the one, we end up, prospering so much more out of that one, interaction that we have with this small guy that might be down here. That's the one that's actually probably going to be easier to get in the door than the big behemoth across the way. So start small.
Well, and I just want to add to that this point about, what can we expect from employers? I think the consortium collaboration, all that is premised on the fact that people can play well together. And so I think, as we wrap up this section and we're going to open it up to you guys in just a moment, all of you out there, I should say, who might have questions. So we have microphones set up, so take a look around that you can ask the panel questions. But what can we expect behavior and coming into the space from employers?
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to answer that question, but I did have a question,
Okay.
a comment that I wanted to make.
Okay.
And that is just one of the things that I've learned too, I think, through this work is that context matters. So what I really saw through the pandemic is sometimes employers don't want to engage with the local board. They want to engage, because I live in Bend. I live 2.5 hours away from Klamath Falls. I live 2.5 hours away from the Dalles, right? So I'm not as relevant in those other areas, right? Because we're not headquartered there. So we don't have to lead everything. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we're not the right leader to convene that conversation. And I'd love to give an example in the frontier area where we're talking major small business. And so frontier is not something I knew what that was when I moved to Bend, and apparently it's like less than a person per square mile. Who knew? Apparently now I know. So basically we have a chamber that started in Condon and now is serving Sherman, Wheeler, and Gillum counties. Those are some teens counties. They do not have a robust population. And this chamber stepped up. And they are now the greater Tri-County Chamber. And they got, they're doing a rural workforce and economic development initiative. And it's incredible. So anybody who wants to learn about it should come to my board meeting later this month.
Well, and that reminds me of Boardman Foods in Boardman, which stepped up and saw a need around childcare, and then extended that childcare to the community, and saw that their need went beyond that. So I'll answer the question about what you can expect from employers. I think what you should expect from employers is the ability to participate in a way, in a manner that leaves space for smaller organizations, smaller businesses, community voices. If you have an employer who's like, well, I am the behemoth and I don't care what other people think and I want a solution for myself, I mean, that's not a regional solution, and you may not be the entity to push back on that, and that's where partnerships come in. It may be another peer employer who you have a good relationship who says, no, we don't play like that in this room because it's not going to work, it's not going to be effective, because it is difficult for people to check egos. This is a reality, and any kind of partnership is premised on people coming into the partnership with good intentions, whatever that partnership is.
I would add too, Shari, that expect the unexpected. What we in the Next Gen world very purposely do is actually try to get as many employers in a room for that launch meeting, what we call a launch meeting, as possible. Because while you want to go with the one and the coalition of the willing, you want to cast a wide net early on because you never know who's going to pop up and say, I want to tackle that issue. And what I've said for years, and I still see it, is that workforce is always the pound the table issue for every single employer in every single industry. And yet, in our experience, that does not directly correlate to the ability to actually get something done quickest. Workforce issues, as you know, are messy, 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 messy. So if you get them in a room talking about other opportunities related to their community and competitiveness, I have seen sector partnerships tackle affordable workforce housing first. What? I have seen them tackle broadband across their rural community. I have seen them tackle transportation issues. I have seen them tackle childcare issues. And while they're tackling those and getting early wins, right, that are driven by them, they're starting to really feel out what do we need to do to solve our short-term and long-term workforce strategies. So expect some unexpected and leave room for the unexpected because, again, you want them in the middle designing this and hammering it out with you. So I think you can expect a lot, honestly, when you listen, right? Actively listen, actively coordinate, and plug in.
I want to make good on the promise to give you all the opportunity to ask questions. And so there are, so we have a question already? Oh, no, we're going to show where the mics are. There we go. So Clay has an orange mic. Oh, we have a question over there, yeah. Oh, there's the mic. So she's just doing the Vanna White situation. There's a mic over there. And so I do want to give folks the opportunity to ask any questions of the panelists or any reflection or anything you'd like to share for the room about a strategy or that you're working on. It's an opportunity to do that second goal that I talked about. So I see somebody going. Are you going with the mic or nope? Anybody?
I have a mic.
You have a mic. Well, you can talk into it.
Thank you, Shari. I'm Sally Bell, and I'm with the Technology Association of Oregon. Great to see so many friends and partners here from across the state. I have a question, not a strategy to offer, but it's about retention. So we represent the tech sector, and so many of our companies in the state are bleeding senior level talent. So when we think about our workforce crisis and challenges, we have, of course, the need for more entry-level training. But when I think about finding more senior computer engineers, there just aren't any in Oregon. We don't know where to find the talent for these tech companies. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on the retention strategy along with upskilling and reskilling into tech, and where those meet and what our opportunities are. As we see more of our senior leaders in tech get hired away by companies in Seattle and the Bay Area, I don't blame them. These are really good salaries, but how do we retain within this strategy for Future Ready Oregon? Thanks.
Nikki'd like to work on that.
Yep. We are in 40 states, and tech is definitely one of the industries we see a lot. So your problem is not uncommon across the US, if that makes you feel any better, maybe not. And then particularly if you think about just the kind of transformation of work in the last couple of years, that has also kind of accelerated all of the things that we knew were going to happen already. And I think maybe Patsy said this earlier, these problems were already there. A lot of them have just been uncovered or accelerated in this space. And so one of the first things is growing your own talent, right? You talked about upskilling. Being able to think about what those connection points, those pathways, those career ladders might be for people within your own company is kind of the first piece of that. Something I think kind of newer of what we're thinking about in the TPM space that we've heard from our practitioners is around this kind of shifting the idea of what your talent marketplace, your region is. Particularly now. So we like to think sometimes when we're talking about whether or not employers are poaching from each other, we're really thinking about it as a larger ecosystem, right? It's a supply chain in itself. If you have larger employers that are taking some of your talent, think about how you can think about you being a part of that supply chain and how you can connect those pieces, right? I'm not saying that you could necessarily do this with Seattle. I mean, you could maybe reach out to them, but we have seen people start going across state lines and saying, okay, we know we're getting some of our talent here, or it's going here. We're all in the same industry. Let's work together to figure out how we can make this a continuous process. So it's not about taking from each other in the sense of you're left kind of holding your own hands, but how are we building this into an actual streamlined pipeline where when somebody's leaving or moving on to their next role, we're backfilling that immediately. So that's not a silver bullet solution, but maybe just something to think about is how you might be able to rethink the way you're thinking about your talent marketplace and who's in that geographic region, and how you can actually build partnerships with those people who are taking your talent.
With that real quick, one of the things we look at, and I feel your pain point because I've got 30 engineer openings right now, is when we look at the industry as a whole, when we look at swings, ups and downs, we look back to 2008, in the semiconductor industry. In 2008, the Great Recession, a lot of our semiconductor equipment got packed up and shipped overseas and started producing overseas because it was a cheaper realm to produce wafers and what have you, semiconductors. So now we fast forward to 14 years later, and all of a sudden we find through the pandemic that, hey, we need to bring this back to the U.S. And all of a sudden, it's a global shortage now, of talent because we're all in such high demand for these products. And the question almost becomes, as part of Future Ready Oregon, is looking at those industries that have those downswings and understanding that inevitably those sectors are going to come back at some point. And having those people ready to go back into those sectors or transition, I mean, from a standpoint of industry and just overall, generational changes in positions, I think the average is now 3 years at staying with any employer. But how many times are people changing careers now too? And, Future Ready Oregon needs to look at not only, the folks that are in school right now, but also the folks that want to go back to school. And I know that PCC, especially Portland Community College, is looking at the fact that every 7 years people are thinking about a career change, and the pandemic has really brought that out. So not only at the lower level of education, but how do we continue on the upper level of education for post-bacs, for college degrees and what have you, to bring these folks back into various industries that are booming at the time. But if we don't keep track of what's happening, we're going to definitely fall behind.
Thanks. I think we have another question out there. Mm-hmm.
Hi, thanks for the fantastic panel. I'm taking I've like 50 million quotes from each of you, so thank you so much. My name's Nate Wildfire. I work with the Missing Middle Housing Fund. We are a nonprofit that works with innovators across the entire housing sector to try to double Oregon's housing production in half the cost and half the time. And so many of the employers that my nonprofit speaks with say their number one barrier to hiring is a lack of housing, particularly for middle income earners, what we would generally call our workforce, or over the last 2 years, our essential workers. We heard earlier in one of the presentations, housing and also accessible childcare are such huge barriers to bringing folks into the workforce who have either left or just need to upskill or change jobs. I'm very curious from each of your perspectives how employers, especially this coalition of the willing that you keep describing, play a role in those two areas, which are fundamentally, in some cases, pretty outside their wheelhouse: housing, childcare. Thanks.
Thanks so much. I'm going to let everybody answer that. However, I'm going to say this. I'm going to take a point of order. That, in my opinion, the states and places that are going to win the future are going to answer that question. We are going to have to figure out a government, private, public-private answer to childcare and housing. Full stop. And because the workforce is mobile, right? So this is how you compete with Seattle or San Francisco. If we answer this question around childcare and housing, guess what? We can compete with anybody then, because you can work from here, why am I work from there if I have these other structures and supports here? So states historically look at this like, oh, I'm going to give a tax incentive, I'm going to bring a company here. No, we need to look at life incentive in the states and how that complements this workforce pipeline. So that's just my opinion, but Lindsay?
I'll just give a couple real examples because I love that you brought this up, and I also just want to call out because Kyle Stevens, I know you're somewhere. It's really bright, so we can't really actually see your faces, by the way. But you had mentioned, we're going to start exploring, childcare and childhood development sector partnership. How do we actually bring these folks together? So that's one thing I just want to put a pin in because I think that's such an awesome idea. They have existed in the past. They don't always sustain. But affordable workforce housing, let's just tackle that. So in Frontier, Montana, great example, one of our next gen sector partnerships, the manufacturers in Great Falls just said, well, we'll just do it because there's no housing stock and we can't recruit our engineers, let alone actually have places for our machinists and our sheet metal cutters to work. So this is a huge problem. And so they just pulled their funding and they literally bought and built a 4-family unit structure. And then they arranged, and it took some legal work, but they arranged that to be the place where people would land for a certain period of time in exchange for a commitment to work in the company for a certain period of time. And then they built more housing stock, and then they partnered with development corporations. And so it was the first thing they tackled, actually. In Seattle, where I live, I know we're talking middle, income earners, but just coming into Portland and realizing how similar Portland and Seattle look right now, it's what have we done? We have people living in tents everywhere, right? So yeah, so you're right that this has to be the issue. So in Seattle, they have a healthcare partnership. It is next gen style. They organized 75 different healthcare organizations, very similar to what Phoenix did 10 years ago, actually, their first healthcare partnership. And they brought them together and they hammered out a whole bunch of issues and affordable workforce housing, getting really specific about at what level of average median income, right? Are we talking, is it 60%? Is it 70%? Like, where's the cliff here and where's the unaffordability here? How are we cross-hatching that with our most critical occupations like our nurses and our techs, our surge techs, farm techs, all techs? How much are they earning, and then how much are they missing out on the middle income housing? And then they wrote up a big policy briefing and they handed it to the mayor, and she incorporated in healthcare, workforce, affordable housing policies alongside the public school teachers, firemen, police, affordable housing policies that they had. So it was a direct impact that the sector partnership had on affordable housing policy for the city of Seattle. So I throw that out as an example again of like, what can we expect from employers? Well, don't limit them because they might tackle that issue.
Heather,
I
I'm
just
going to
wanna-
give you the final few minutes on this because
And
our
I'll
sound says
try
wrap
and
it
take
up.
30 seconds because it says wrap it up right now on my screen. But I have 1 minute and 1 second. I just want to do a shout out. One of the things that we are doing at East Cascade Works in partnership with Clackamas Workforce Partnership, 3 community colleges, 3 STEM, 3 CCR&Rs, and 3 early learning hubs, is we are exploring how to develop an apprenticeship program for early learning educators that will run parallel with the AAS degree in early education. And what this will do is allow people who maybe have had lots of experience, maybe they even have been doing this a really long time, but they don't have a credential. So we are looking at developing a competency-based or proficiency-based version of this that will be BOLI certified. I'm confident we will get there. And it will allow us to pay people while they are in their field placement. And so this will immediately impact the capacity of existing providers, and it will pay people while they're going through school. Because one of the challenges, frankly, in this field, it's just like CNAs in the healthcare industry, it takes a lot of credentialing and a lot of education and a very little salary at the end of the day. So we are doing it with the goal in mind of scaling it statewide. So wish us luck. We just got an early learning grant, and we'll see what we learn.
All right, and I'm going to ask for another round of applause for our panel. Thank you so much.